Good evening. I want to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished guest, Dr. Pratima Murthy, Director NIMHANS, and the deans of various schools, faculty members, admin staff, and students of RV University, and the sister institutions of RV Group, and others who are watching it on the live on the YouTube channel. And Dr. Pratima Murthy is a highly accomplished expert in the field of mental health. And I have had a good fortune of working with her while I was a part of the National Human Rights Commission on a report called Mental Health and Human Rights. And her work has received many recognitions and awards. And she has worked closely with ILO, WHO, and UNODC. And she has a very hectic schedule. And we are so fortunate that she has accepted our request and agreed to address us on the occasion of the International Women's Day special lecture. And without further ado, I request Dr. Pratima Murthy to address us.
Thank you very much, Professor Murthy. And it's indeed a great pleasure to be amidst all of you on this occasion. To all the women out there, my special greetings to you on International Women's Day. It's just, I think, a symbolic that we choose to talk about securing the rights of women on this particular day. But I think on every single day of the year, we need to be conscious of gender equity and how we can secure it in our midst for every individual in the country. I think it's very important to understand what gender empowerment really means. And various people look at it in different ways, but very simply speaking, I think empowerment is about enhancing a woman's sense of self-worth, increasing the ability to make their own choices, and the right to influence social change for themselves and for others. And therefore, this has very important connotations, not just for their own well-being, which is very, very important for their own success, for their own ability to sustain in society, but it has other repercussions, which we will talk about as we go on. I think when we look at inequity, it has a lot of historic roots. While we might say we've always worshipped Durga as the epitome of bravery and strength and so on, we know that when it translates into actual ways in which women have had to bear the brunt of a variety of social disadvantages, this has been present for many, many centuries. We know, for example, that in A Choice for Life itself, we know how rampant female infanticide was. So much so that there had to be a law against gender determination. That law, fortunately, has seen some degree of normalization of gender issues, but still, in many parts of the country, gender ratios are very skewed against women. So just imagine for a moment how, right at the time of birth, there has been a sense of inequity in terms of, a chance to thrive and succeed in society. We know that as young children, girl children have always been disadvantaged. Of course, this morning I was actually talking at the NIAS, and I was talking about how privileged I was, how encouraged I was, how many opportunities I got. So few of us have not faced that kind of discrimination. But when we talk about the entire country, we know that the situation is so different: urban, rural, different cities, north, south, east, west. There are so many differences in the attitude towards women. So as children, for example, chance to go to school, particularly in rural areas, so many young girls, and particularly during COVID, when there were problems in terms of the parents migrating or going out, the girl children had the greater burden of staying back from school. We've actually published data to suggest that when it came to accessing online classes, it was the girls that got the last opportunity to access these classes because they were limited, internet connections or telephones, and therefore the choices were very limited for them. Again, when you talk about education, completing education, we know that there is gender inequity there as well. When you talk about nutrition, we know that the girl child is more likely to be malnourished as compared to her male siblings. And particularly when girls are married at a very young age and they bear children very young, anemia and other nutritional problems are serious problems that confront the young woman. Then, of course, we know that apart from marriage, sexuality and reproduction are areas where women, have very little autonomy. In fact, I remember when I was doing a study for the UNODC, when we asked about choices for women, about women in making choices, they said very often we don't even have choices as to what to cook at home. Because somebody else dictates to us what needs to be cooked at home. So even in terms of choosing the provisions that are required, there are women who do not have those choices. They cannot go out and seek healthcare because in many parts of India, they cannot go out alone. So that is another aspect that we need to be conscious of. I mentioned autonomy in decision making, even around minor things. So when it comes to major decision making, a lack of financial autonomy, lack of decision-making autonomy really puts women at a great disadvantage in many parts of the country. Of course, a few decades ago, we had practices like, we knew about dowry-related problems. Of course, several decades ago, sati has been established. But we know, for example, that widows still are very disadvantaged when they do not have a male partner to take care of them. You'll know that a lot of the women's movement in many other parts of the world starts with getting franchise rights for women. Fortunately, as a country, we've in those areas we've actually done pretty well in terms of having the right to vote fairly early on. When you look at women in positions of power, again you'll see that perhaps apart from agriculture, many of the other areas are hugely underrepresented as far as the women's workforce is concerned, particularly in positions of power. Of course, we can also say that there are positives that we've had. We've probably been the only country who's had president, a prime minister, several other people in power, but these are in singular numbers. You can count them, on your fingers. Finally, it's not just about those leadership positions, but also positions of influence where women can make the change. So I think it's very important to make women capacitated and empowered so that when they are in positions of influence, they can use it well and make sure that things become more equitable for everyone, particularly the female gender. COVID has thrown up a huge number of gendered disadvantages. I don't know how many of you have been following some of the research there, but there has been concerns about growing domestic violence when people have been working from home, and there's a lot of, unhappiness and tensions at home. Women and children are often the most disadvantaged. Pregnant women, when it comes to getting care, again, can be extremely disadvantaged in situations of stress. I think we're seeing now in the Ukraine war how difficult it has been for women to get proper care. So it's not just in these acute situations like COVID or war times, but even at other times where there can be a huge amount of disadvantage in terms of accessing care. There are, of course, inequities in healthcare, particularly, that we need to be aware of. Inequities in treatment access. So when there is a limited amount of time, it is usually the woman, and very often it is not just the system which neglects the woman. It's the woman who neglects herself as well, because she generally tends to put the needs of the children and the family well before her. So whether it's in terms of her own nutrition, seeking health care and health care, the women tend to be disadvantaged. And then, of course, we find that even in terms of completing treatment, many women drop out of treatment very quickly because they cannot come back for follow-up. I treat people with addiction in my hospital. If there is a male with addiction, you're sure that the entire family rallies around the person to get them into treatment. But if it is a woman with addiction, very often the support from the family is not as forthcoming. And it's only when the problem is very severe and the person's role is incapacitated that the person gets brought into treatment. There have been several steps in our country to address this kind of disadvantage. We've all heard about the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaigns that have been very active throughout the country. There are saving schemes for young girls. There are Mahila Shakti Kendras, which look at helping women to empower themselves. There are programs like STEP programs for women. There is the Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana. So there are several things, but we are still at the stage of infancy where we're just making sure that women are financially empowered. But obviously, in a society, it is not financially empowered is a very, very important thing. But in addition to that, you need social empowerment. You need psychological empowerment, that women must feel that they are, equal citizens in the eyes of the society. We need legal empowerment. We do know that there have been laws which have tried to reduce the harassment against women. So it's predominantly these kind of the dowry harassment prevention, or the prevention of sexual harassment at the workplace, that is talked about quite a bit. So it is all about prevention of harassment. So the laws that have been there are more to protect the women, but we need much more to promote the rights of women in society. And I think we need to look at legal frameworks which will ensure that this is done on a continuous basis and strengthened over time. Of course, we also need women to be politically empowered. So it's actually nice to see that there are more and more members of parliament who are women who are representing the society. And these are all indices of how you can secure women's rights by making sure women are not only visibly there, but actively participating in whatever concerns society. So apart from the greater visibility, we also need to focus on real empowerment. And real empowerment is not just, platitudes and, some kind of a talk about these things, but actually ensuring that women are looked after in terms of the various kinds of rights that they're entitled to. The UN talks about various principles of empowerment. One of the principles is to create high-level corporate leadership for gender equality. We do know that sometimes these work very well. Take international examples of people like Indra Nooyi. And there are several national examples of women who are leading in the corporate sector, in the banking sector, in the health sector, but they are few and far between in comparison. Considering that, our gender ratios are more or less equal, that equal or proportional participation in situations of high levels of leadership does not exist as well. So that's, I think, very important to look at. The second principle is to treat everyone fairly at work, respecting and supporting non-discrimination and human rights. So I think it's very important to look at human rights as an underlying principle of equality and equity. And if we ensure that, we can make a lot of changes. The principle 3 is to ensure health, well-being, and safety of everyone at the workplace. whether it's male or female, but much more if it's female. I can tell you that I was the chair of the Sexual Harassment Prevention Committee at the workplace. I played that role for about 3 years. And very often, people are very, very hesitant to report any kind of harassment at workplace, because very often the problem would be turned upon the complainant, saying that they had been instrumental in perpetuating or in creating this situation. Number A, the onus of showing or proving that there was harassment very often lay with the victim, and that can be extremely difficult. The victim very often has to get their own witnesses. All of it is extreme. As it is, the victim has been through quite a lot in terms of the harassment, and then the whole investigative procedure, if it's not done in the interest of the woman, can be extremely traumatic to them. And also, it represents a loss of face when these things kind of get into the public domain. And a lot of people hesitate to come up because of that. Now, a lot of these things may not represent serious offenses, but the point is that there is such a lack of sensitivity as to what is offensive, what is insensitive, that I think educating people about how they need to maintain their boundaries in terms of what they say, their actions, their social media, communications, I think we have a lot to educate people about. So unless this kind of sensitivity comes only when people are well educated, they're aware of the consequences of any kind of overstepping of boundaries, and clear action is taken when such violation occurs. So one of the things I used to do as a chairperson is that there is what is called a opportunity for reconciliation. Reconciliation is when you bring the complainant and the person who is the perpetrator, or the person against whom the complaint is, you inquire independently with both of them, check what their expectations are. And very often the complainant would want that this person will not repeat the same thing with somebody else. They want a written letter of apology and an assurance that this will not happen again. So when such things are done, the problem mitigates. So I think it's very important to be able, as I said, not just to educate, but also to bring people together, to reconcile, to provide people corrective experiences so that they do not repeat the same problems again and again. And that's something that can be done. Nowadays, a lot of institutions have the ICC, or the Internal Complaints Committee, where a lot of issues related to gender are taken. The other thing that happens in educational institutions, I just spend a few minutes talking about educating education institutions and how one can strengthen gendered issues in educational institutions. We have a students' welfare network, and we also have at each department level some degree of support to students, because I think it is a generational thing. It is also a gender-related thing, especially when you have younger undergraduates who have just come away from school and pre-university, are dealing with new environments, new people, the stress of studies, the stress of food, the stress of language, and the stress of dealing with their interpersonal relationships. There can be situations where they can decompensate, and therefore having good support systems at the workplace is very, very important. So that's another thing that the workplace needs to have, ways of promoting mental health, keeping people, not just physically healthy, like having gyms for their physical thing, but also, having things like nowadays yoga is very popular, various kinds of dances, or, meditation is popular. And these are ways in which you can get people to kind of look after themselves, be calmer. Again, COVID has taught us that even people who are otherwise generally considered normal can, during stressful times, actually decompensate, and how we need to reach out to each other, help them to strengthen themselves and become more resilient. But at the same time, if they don't have that capacity to do so, how to provide them some support so that, a problem which is stressful does not convert to depression or anxiety or thoughts of, harming oneself and suicide, something that all of us need to be concerned as a society. Most suicides occur in a moment of extreme distress, a moment of complete helplessness and hopelessness. So if we are able to tell people, to reassure them that support is available, that they should talk about these feelings when they have these feelings, they are not stigmatized when they have these kind of distress. There's no expectation that they always have to deal with it by themselves. If we are able to provide these messages to people, more and more people will reach out when they're distressed, so that this distress can be handled at that stage itself and not converted to something more serious or sinister. Promoting education is therefore another principle of empowerment. And in addition to that, providing training. Now, training people. Now, I work in a mental health space. And even in that mental health space, our staff, our faculty need some training. So I can imagine that in a non-mental health workspace, that teachers, peers, various other staff may need to be trained in good communication. I think the art of communication is something that doesn't come naturally to everybody. How do you listen to another person? How do you respond to another person? How do you communicate in such a way that you don't put down another person? What do you say verbally? What do you say non-verbally? These are important skills that you can teach people. And those go a very long way, whether it is counseling for cancer, counseling a student in distress, counseling a student who has substance use, any of these situations. The other thing to remember is that staff also need some degree of mentoring and support. And in a workplace, having the staff as well as the students involved in activities which improve their mental well-being can certainly be important from an organizational viewpoint. Then, of course, having professional development courses which encourages women to participate in it equitably is also very important. And encouraging the participation of women in positions of influence is also very important. The fifth principle that the UN talks about is having a supply chain, marketing practices, and enterprises that actually empower women. So now you see that there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of schemes where women are, especially even entrepreneurs, are actually encouraged to apply for. But I think it's not just about gender. It is also about, being confident. It is also about, being perseverant. These are all strategies for success. And I think every woman should make sure that they develop these kind of attitudes which help them to kind of succeed in life. The last penultimate principle is that of championing equality through community initiatives and advocacy. And the reason I decided that I should accept this invitation is that the more we speak about it, the more we are seen to speak about it, the more we kind of strengthen these initiatives, the more likely that change is going to happen. So I think these are all opportunities to make sure that we change in that direction and strengthen this cause. And of course, nowadays, we all have to measure and report publicly on progresses in gender equality. I think all institutions have to provide what is their breakup, what are the programs they have in place. Certainly as government institutions, we are asked, what is our ratio of faculty in terms of gender, our ministerial staff in terms of gender, our nursing staff in terms of gender, our students, including our postgraduate students in terms of gender. I think there is a constant monitoring of this kind of activity. I am very, very proud to say that amongst the deans that we have four. We have 3 deans and 3 associate deans. 4 of the 6 of them are women, and I think that speaks very, very well for an institution that we've had women. Now I've been the second woman in this institution. We had a neurologist who was earlier a director, woman director. I'm the first psychiatrist to be a woman director. As I said, we have several of our heads of the departments are women. And therefore, I think it's a sense of great pride to us that certainly we have women in leadership roles. But we're also aware that right across the stream, right across the various positions, there we do try and make sure that gender is looked after. Of course, it also means that there are a lot of challenges. For example, we have a lot of young people, young women who are working, so their own maternity related issues, and those issues need support. When they're under emotional pressures, they need help. So one of the things that it's very important to do is to foster a workplace which supports, which develops very strong networks and bonding so that everyone can help each other. And I think there it's not just gender, it's about teamwork, it's about mutual respect and mutual support, and it's about coming together as a team to help one another. COVID has taught us many lessons. And one of those lessons is to reach out to others. I hope it has made us more sensitive, more engaged with our communities, and more sensitive to social issues, including the need to strengthen women's role and participation in society. I'll leave you with those thoughts, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or indeed listen to any responses and experiences that many of you may have to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pratima. It was a wonderful this thing. You have taken us through a vast canvas of issues, and starting from the birth onwards. And you talked about a law against gender determination. And if one looks at the number of convictions under PCPNDT Act, and when you contrast it with the number of female infanticides or the sex ratio at birth, like the convictions are very, very few actually, and it's a sad reality. And you also talked about the inequity in treatment access and how there's a lack of support for particularly women with addiction, and then family is not forthcoming. It's a very important issue for all of us to reflect and see that there is a transformation at the family level, at the community level, and you also underlined, not only the preventive aspect, particularly prevention of dowry, sexual harassment, and domestic violence, but also positive promotion of women's rights and this nutritional thing you mentioned between NFHS 4 and NFHS 5, the kind of improvement that was supposed to happen hasn't happened. And in case of some of the areas, maternal anemia, and in case of number of children with stunted and wasted, there is a deterioration, in fact, and it's a very, very serious thing. And so there is a very nicely you have captured a lot of issues and emphasize the need for training, education, and also fostering networks and groups at the workplace. Thanks a lot. Now I open it for Q&A. I request all the faculty members and staff to switch on their videos. Yogendra, you have a question. Please raise your hand and then I'll call on the person. Yeah. Yogendra, please go on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for your talk. And we have been looking forward to this for very long. Since we started in August last year, we've been thinking of to invite you. And thank you for accepting our invitation. My question is particularly about addiction and alcoholism. There's a lot of stigma attached to it, whereas for men it is probably accepted. But for women, there's a lot of stigma, and especially in the rural parts or smaller cities. So are there any provision or any mandate to health service providers from the public sector to sensitize or carry out sensitization drives about alcoholism? Because I have not experienced or seen any of those.
Yeah. So particularly when it comes to gender and substance use is triply stigmatizing to women. One is because of substance use itself being stigmatizing. Secondly, it's because they are women. And thirdly, it's the gaze on them becomes even more when they come out as women with addiction. Therefore, what happens is they don't come for treatment unless the problem is very severe. And therefore, what we used to see at NIMHANS, maybe about 20 years ago, is that the woman would come with severe neuropsychiatric disturbances. They would have fits, or they would have, brain damage and, develop, behavior problems when they were brought in. But one thing that I can say is that has changed. That has changed to the extent that in 2015, we actually started a separate ward for women with addiction. It's not a very nice thing to have to do. But then we realized we had patients who came in for treatment, and they were younger people, they were well educated. And there was this, just as there had been a perception among men maybe 2 or 3 decades back, the women started saying, we are not mentally ill. We would not like to be treated along with people with mental illness. Although as psychiatrists, we know that, addiction is as much a, mental disorder as anything else. But this is the perception that people had. And therefore, we had a separate space for their treatment. Second thing is that women would never come for follow-up. So therefore, you need to have other ways of following them up, in terms of reaching out to them. Now, telephony and, internet have really provided us opportunities to reach out to them in a very confidential manner, etc. The third thing are the misconceptions, particularly in rural society, about the use of alcohol around pregnancy and childbirth. So usually after childbirth, women are sometimes given alcohol and actually learn to use alcohol for subsequent children, they're already addicted. And that we've done some research work, and there's research work all over the world to suggest that drinking alcohol during pregnancy, even at moderate amounts, can cause what is the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So unfortunately, the children are also affected, their faces, their behavioral problem, etc. So it's a kind of cycle of it. Now, there are programs from the Social Justice and Empowerment Ministry on trying to provide awareness about the consequences. The Temperance Board, there are Temperance Board in every state whose job it is to actually provide this kind of, service to people. But somehow these are very siloed. So they do some awareness programs. There's no link with what the society needs. And we have tried to, do this through awareness, particularly in schools and colleges. But I think the efforts are few and far between. The social expectancy, and that's true for boys and for girls. In fact, I'm just coming out of a program where we did a competition called Quit Tobacco, Be a Hero. And for the first time, these were young, mostly men, of course, who came on video and talked about how they quit tobacco before they got into serious problems. When they realized they had to be responsible for a little child that was born at home, they realized the harms that it was causing. So, you actually, these are the kind of paradigm shifts you have to cause. Not that, alcohol drinking is very fashionable and equity means that, everybody should be doing the same thing. It's really about how you can look after your health. Those are the messages. Why you should not use tobacco or alcohol to relieve stress, but you need stress relief. How do you do that in society? How do you have a good time without getting drunk? These are the things messaging that we need to do. And there, I don't think it's only the government or the health sector. It's you and I who need to partner to kind of spread these messages. So, that's what we need to do.
Thank you for your answer, ma'am. And I have a follow-up question, but I'll send an separate email rather than wasting time of my other colleagues here. Sure.
We have time for a few more questions. Can anybody else wants to ask? Please raise your hand and switch on your video.
Maybe Mr. Singh can ask. Oh, there's some.
Priya Nair. Professor Priya Nair, please.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful talk. You covered actually everything that we can look for in these times, which are very, very, very challenging for all of us. I just have one question pertaining to the adolescent age group that you were talking of, especially in education institution like ours, where we have undergraduate students, and we do face a lot of challenges when it comes to giving them mental health services. Is there anything that you would like to suggest in terms of, some few things that we really need to keep in mind? The first few things that we must keep in mind while addressing some of these mental health issues that we are facing right now, especially post-pandemic. And as you know, we closed down in the month of January, February. We reopened, and we are already facing certain such issues with our students. And we are in the process of also setting up a center. But are there any first few thoughts that you might want to share with us in terms of how to put a kind of a mental health service in place for our adolescent students?
Yeah, I think we're looking at every organization having some kind of a cell which is has people who are sensitive to students, more sensitive to students' needs. I think all teachers are sensitive to students' needs, but I think it requires a certain attitude to be able to listen a little bit longer to students. Very often, a lot of the stress that students go through are related to temporary situations. I can tell you during COVID that a lot of my residents, and I deal with postgraduates, they're already doctors. They've been 4.5 years in medical school, and they come to me. But that's the first time I realized how, even among slightly older students, when there is a stressful situation at home, it's impossible almost for them to focus on their studies or on their work. So I think somebody who understands, who listens to what's happening in their lives, it's the focus not just on academics, but on other aspects. So knowing that there is a place or a person that I can reach out to. So one of the things that is very useful is to have a particular teacher identified, or a mentor for each group of students who inquires after them on their overall well-being. That's very important. Sometimes peers can do that very effectively. So having a buddy system in college where one person looks out for the other buddy, and they not necessarily have to be past friends, but people who are willing to kind of watch each other's backs. I think that can be a very, very useful system. Of course, having other things apart from academics which bring young people together. Now, that's been very challenging around COVID, because earlier there was so much happening in a lot of, especially undergrad colleges. There were so many cultural events. There were places where people could show, their other talents, could just let their hair down and be relaxed. Many of those opportunities have kind of, been deprived for young students. So much so they've all been called COVID students now, and with online classes, if they've been at home, perhaps it's not so bad. But if they've been in their hostels and had nothing else to do, that can also be difficult. So making sure that there are enough other opportunities, hopefully the shadow of COVID behind us, we should be able to resume some of these so-called social activities. And we never realize the importance of some of these. It is only when and that's true for all of us, teaching from home can be as stressful for a teacher as it must be for a student. So having these are all, I think, very simple strategies that can be done. Having a college counselor is another, way of, doing things. And many colleges and schools now mandate having a counselor who's a mental health professional. The other thing, of course, is to train a group of people in the skills of counseling, identifying problems. I can tell you, we had a very interesting program in the prisons. In the Parappan Agrahara in Bangalore, in the prison. Now, in the prison, there are, almost 5,000 prisoners, and there's one prison doctor, psychiatrist. Impossible to deal with it. So we actually realized that there were a lot of fear among the convicts. Now, I'm just giving this. This has nothing to do with RV College. So I'm just giving you a completely different example of where, in the most unanticipated of circumstances, you can actually get someone to help. So here were convict prisoners who had the attitude to help others. And one of the postgraduates who was doing his PhD trained them in identification of mental disorders. And that way, they were actually able to provide some degree of mental health promotion to under trials who are extremely distressed. They've been picked up from somewhere, brought into the jail, nothing else to do in jail, and they were able to make a change. So in educational institutions, there are so many more opportunities to create that kind of a environment. And mental health is not something very, very, alien. It's not an alien thing. It's really about how to look after yourself, just as you look after your physical well-being, you tone your muscles, you exercise, you learn how to calm your mind, you learn how to relax, you learn how to avoid certain things which can be damaging to your health. And those can be provided by all of us. When there is a stage of severe distress, helping a person to reach out to one of us so that we can tie the person up to somebody else, or having a counselor and having a peer group which is somewhat sensitized to these issues, I think can go a long way. And I think now all our schools and colleges need that. I think it is a generational thing as well. I think nowadays there are far more students who have a lot to kind of juggle, who come away long distances away from their families, who have multiple complex issues apart from their studies, including relationships, including finances, a whole lot of things that they have to handle. And therefore, I think certainly a contemporary life comes with its set of stresses. I need to teach them to be resilient, more importantly. I think teaching them how to cope is also very, very important. It prepares them for a great later adult life as well.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I have a supplementary to what Dr. Priya Nair has asked. Have you come across any cases about the Generation Z, Generation Z, their identity issues? Like these days, I have seen a trend where they don't see themselves as a binary, as a he or she, but as a them or they. So do you get any issues relating to this identity confusion, etc., or identity issues, and how do you handle them?
So I think when it comes to identity issues, I'm not talking about gender identity here. I'm just talking about formation of one's identity, developing self-confidence, developing self-esteem, these kind of things. I was just talking to a group from the NIAS this afternoon. And one of the things is, how do you develop a person's self-esteem and confidence in themselves? The only way you can do that if there is enough encouragement, if there are opportunities, if there is support, and if there is also an opportunity to understand that failure or disappointment is not an indication of one's inability or otherwise. So that I think is very, very important for people to learn as a concept. What you're specifically referring to are gender identity issues. And I mean, these are not very common issues, but when they do occur, they can be very troubling to people. I think nowadays, people are more willing, people who have gender identity issues are more willing to talk about it because there is a greater, visibility for people with, alternate gender identities. They obviously need understanding. Some people have gender identity confusion, and it is those people with gender identity confusion who probably need to see a mental health professional. But nowadays, a lot of people are sure about their different gender identity. And there, I think it is a lot of patience, understanding, sensitivity that is very important.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question. Dwarika, can you please unmute yourself? Yeah, Professor Dwarika, Provo Vice Chancellor, RV University. Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. It was a very enlightening session by you, and a lot of thoughts came. And we being a very young university, I think that a lot of these things are very, very important and pertinent for us for implementation as well. And this is coming from some of the questions Priya asked. One of the post-pandemic issues we as educators are facing after 2 years of their online and then online-offline situation is that sometimes we realize that this generation, so much of technology is part of their lives, and 24/7 there is a mobile phone, social media, even the classes used to be online. I've come to believe, and maybe rare people, I believe that these are not the distractions for them. People like us and the classes happening are the distractions for them. It's the other way around.
That's true.
They're itching to go back to their normal life where we are off. So sometimes we are facing a complete lack of interest in learning, complete lack of having a physical interaction, complete lack of, because I have had students coming to me and saying that, sir, can we shift to online classes? Here is somebody, we are like, you waited for an online physical interaction. Here's some bunch of people who are saying we want to go back to an online. I think, how do we deal with this? This is a temporary phenomenon. Do you think that this is 2 years of COVID has really done a bit of differency in terms of the way their brains are wired, their social, learning is wired, and they actually avoid actual physical engagement and interaction? How do we deal with that? Across such cases where these are happening with students and kids and of this age group or otherwise. This is my real big challenge.
That's a very, very challenging situation, and people are becoming aware of it, not just among college students, but young kids who have not learned to socialize. And kids who are 1 and 2 who really spent their time seeing only a couple of faces, and the anxieties that they're having when now they have to go out and meet other people. So, socialization is something that we thought of as an automatic phenomenon. And now realizing that, it has so many other ramifications to it. Now, one of the things that possibly happens, I think 2 things have happened as far as students are concerned, from what I understand. One is, of course, that there has been an over-reliance on digital technology, and there has been possibly a sense of greater autonomy and control as far as that is concerned. So when you have to come to a physical environment, and when there is a certain behavior that is expected of you, which requires, which does not allow the operation of that kind of autonomy, but more an engagement with another person. That, I think, can be a little bit of a pain in many aspects. So, I think during the online, perhaps a greater adjustment was for the teachers, because to keep the classes engaging, to prepare and to get used to digital technology was a much greater shift for an effort for the teachers. And for the students, it, I think, became, I'm not sure, I could be corrected on this, but I think it became a very passive reception of information. So we really don't know how this is going to pan out. People say there will not be a normal, it will be a new normal. So in this new normal age, we're probably definitely going to have a much more hybrid way of engaging with one another. But will losing people's skills make it much more difficult for young people in the long run? This is again something that has been questioned. So I think, how do we adjust? I think we have to gradually wean them away from only technology driven. Technology has its advantage for sure, but it also makes people more socially inept. So to wean them away from the technology will require, again, I think, a most challenging time for teachers to be able to make their interactive engagements more meaningful.
Value addiction and
social contact.
Yes, ma'am. And you talk about addiction, ma'am, and I think there is a device addiction, which is very much there.
In some people, it's an over-reliance on technology. Now, technology addiction is quite a different thing. So technology addiction is much like chemical addiction. People talk about behavior addictions, which includes gambling, pornography, as well as mobile addiction and, internet addictions and gaming, etc. So that's a completely different thing. There, it is not that the person is just comfortable with it. There is a compulsive need to keep using it for getting a gratification. That is a little different from, let's say, just being more comfortable with online classes, because, there is no dress code, there is no sense of active participation. So I think those definitely, once weaning process occurs, most people will get out of it, I believe. And I think they will see the value of social interaction. As I said, there's so much more happening in college rather than just the classes with the teachers. There is a lot of learning that is occurring outside of the classroom, all of which hopefully young people will jump back at. But there is a small group who might be addicted to technology. And we're seeing that in young people as well, that, there is a overuse and a misuse of technology. Now, where what is normal, what is abnormal, still the lines are very difficult to draw, but we know if there is a family history of addiction, if there is excessive use to physical and mental detriment and a lack of control, these might represent a technology addiction. And that's something that we need to look out for.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pratima. I know my colleagues have many more questions and the students also are very curious. But we are going to reserve it for a future occasion. We look forward to hosting you at our campus, and we look forward to working with you very closely. And it has been a fascinating address. And you said, as you began in the initially, International Women's Day is not to be observed on one day in a year, but every day we need to work for gender equality and champion gender equality continuously. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, ma'am. And in spite of your hectic schedule, you really took off time and agreed to address our faculty and students. And we are deeply grateful to you. And we look forward to hosting for further future interactions with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with this special lecture is ended. Thank you. All of you can now log out of your Zoom. Thank you.